Jonathan was extremely disappointed that he was not named the future president of Daystar.
Joni Lamb, the strong voice of Daystar, is today embroiled in a startling financial scandal. To the surprise of longtime allies and insiders, she is accused of embezzling funds from the very ministry she helped launch. Rumors of high-level betrayal, secret accounts, and clandestine transactions are spreading quickly. Is the most formidable empire in Christian media on the verge of collapsing? The truth is emerging, and it's more sinister than anyone could have predicted. Neither an inquiry nor a headline prompted it. It all started with a straightforward scene, a silent board meeting between three individuals at Daystar. Her longtime friend Tom Calenderer, whom she fully trusted, her son Joni Lamb, who had grown up witnessing his family establish a Christian media empire, and the network's top executive, Joni Lamb. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. And hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Now, back to the topic. What we were talking about was. It was tight, but not just yet. However, when Jonathan posed a single question, everything abruptly changed. Only one. Mom, did you really go on your honeymoon with $100,000 of Daystar money? Everything changed when that question was asked. Jonathan had no intention of provoking conflict. He was not yelling or blaming, but he could not help but feel that something was off. His mom had just married Dar. They had just returned from a lavish, expensive honeymoon with Doug Weiss. The discussion in the room indicated that ministry funds were used to finance the project. Funds that donors had donated with the hope that they would be used for ministry activity, gospel sharing, and aiding others, not for the network's founder's personal vacation. Then followed the scene that made Jonathan sick. Sitting beside Joni, Tom Calenderer said nonchalantly, "We'll just gift it to her," as though giving her $100,000 wasn't a huge deal. As if the donors to those funds were unimportant. A hasty decision was made behind closed doors without any debate or vote. That was it. The conference continued. But Jonathan was unable to. Somehow he changed. He pondered about it, prayed about it, and sat with it. And it seemed apparent the more he thought about it. This was incorrect. If it had been his mother, it made no difference. How long Tom had been alive was irrelevant. The fact that they attempted to label it a gift was irrelevant. Donor funds were utilized. It belonged to the people who made sacrifices for it. Those who trusted Daystar would find it handy. And he knew deep down that no one would ever speak if he didn't. At first, he talked lightly. People he trusted heard it. He described the events that transpired in that room. He had no personal grievances when he went to the press. He didn't want to upset his mother, but he couldn't remain silent because of how terrible what he had witnessed was. Eventually, word spread, and mayhem broke out. Joni reacted defensively. She said she reimbursed the money. That there was only a misunderstanding and no embezzlement. However, the timing was dubious. Only after Jonathan sounded the alarm, after the questions had been asked, and after the investigation had started was the money returned. Then the harder questions began to appear. If no one knew, would she have reimbursed him? Would Jonathan's silence have ever come to light? This was not only an error. Because of the money and what it represented, it seemed like a betrayal. The potential for Daystar's leaders to covertly spend substantial sums of donor money on lifestyle expenses without anyone noticing. Moreover, it was only discovered because a son, acting out of integrity, had the guts to confront his own mother. Jonathan looked across the boardroom table and stated, "You can't do this," revealing the truth for the first time. There was no plan. It was genuine, but not dramatic. And something far bigger was revealed by one voice in that tiny, remote area. For the first time, the foundation broke, revealing what the darkness had hidden. And there was no going back once that light entered. It was more than just a network. An empire existed. It appeared to be a shining example of Christian media to millions of viewers worldwide. A spot where Joni Lamb stood grinning with her family, spreading messages of truth, love, and hope, where faith came first, and where prayers were aired every day. Behind the lights, the camera, and the practice speeches, however, was a structure that had little to do with a church, let alone any sense of accountability. The majority of people were unaware that Daystar was more than just a television station network. It had a valid church registration. The difference was solely due to that one detail. Daystar was able to avoid the yearly 990 paperwork and open books that most NGOs must submit by registering as a church for tax purposes. No financial information. To put it briefly, they were exempt from disclosing the source of the funding. This allowed Joni Lamb to operate in almost complete secrecy. She oversaw them as well. Following the death of her husband, Marcus Lamb, Joni took over as Daystar's main spokesperson. On television, she frequently came across as humble and spiritual, but in reality, she was the one making decisions. She was in command of the money, wrote the checks, gave her approval for the projects, and was not influenced by a big board or outside advisors. She was answerable to her son Jonathan, her close friend Tom Calenderer, and herself. A multi-million-dollar religious enterprise is run by 3 individuals. It is not a house of worship. The club is private. It was not merely a strange construction. It was risky since the ideal environment for abuse is created. When money is taken out of people's pockets and no one is keeping an eye on its whereabouts. Donors made contributions based on their personal convictions. Some were making monthly tithe payments. Others felt they were contributing to something sacred, so they were sending in the remaining $20. Their vision was to assist missionaries, share the gospel, and provide aid to people in need. They did not know the precise nature of the funds being managed. Furthermore, Joni never gave the details. There were no reports, audits, or external financial evaluations to persuade the pews that the funds were being spent prudently. Additionally, the IRS didn't need any additional information because Daystar was categorized as a church. On paper, no one was breaching any laws. But it felt entirely different in terms of spirituality and ethics. No one questioned it for a long time. The broadcasts did seem lovely, after all. It was upbeat music. It was the same sermon. Additionally, the way Joni spoke gave the impression that they knew her and that she was a member of their own church family. Most observers were unaware that beneath that image lay a structure that lacked true transparency. A system that prevented anyone from preventing Joni from spending donor funds however she saw fit. The $100,000 honeymoon was shocking because of this. Not only the sum, but the fact that it was authorized and used for a private, opulent retreat. Only Jonathan raised worries, objections, or even raised the issue of spending that much money on a private vacation within Daystar's own executives. That demonstrates the extent of Joni's influence. How can she not only lead a ministry but also manage it as her own? People started paying closer attention. It became clear to them that Daystar was not operating like a normal church. No pastors were in charge of a local community, there were no weekly congregational meetings, and there was no real house of worship where the faithful could gather for fellowship and prayer. Rather, there were sound stages, production schedules, corporate offices, cameras, and expensive furniture. It appeared to be a Christian media company rather than a place of worship. Nonetheless, it contained all of the legal safeguards for churches, such as those related to taxes and confidentiality. And that arrangement was ideal for Joni. She was able to preach about faith and humility, while writing checks on the other side of the camera. To support kingdom work, she may solicit donations, but she would never disclose how the funds were used. And Daystar didn't have to because of the way she was registered. That's why everything felt so risky. The system that made it possible, as well as the acts themselves. Many people asked, how did this go unnoticed for so long, as the incident garnered media attention, and the solution was straightforward. That's how it was constructed. It was hidden by Daystar's sheer construction. Since there were no regular audits, external inspection, or financial accountability, Joni was never forced to disclose anything in the first place, therefore she had nothing to hide. People clung to the idea that others would argue, but it's a church. But now what does that mean? Proclaiming the gospel, uplifting communities, serving others, and upholding its precepts are the goals of a genuine church. However, that was not what Daystar was doing in the conventional sense. Millions were being collected by an irresponsible broadcasting machine run by a friend and family. That's more of a brand than a ministry. And the people were saddened when they learned what was happening. Those who had been watching for years now felt deceived. The illusion is just as much of the cause as the money. They were subsidizing a system that functioned more like a business than a church, but they believed they were supporting something ageless and sacred. Joni Lamb was quietly maintaining order, grinning, and preaching in the middle of it all. The most difficult thing for them was acknowledging that they had put their trust in her, sobbed during her broadcasts, prayed for her, and contributed what little they had, and now they had questions. Ones for which they received no response. Because even after acknowledging that she had reimbursed the money, Joni turned back to the camera as like nothing had happened, but she did not offer an explanation, a shrug, or an apology. But because of what they believed to be a church, something had occurred that totally startled them. They mistook it for a ministry, but it was something very else. A closed loop, a protected system. And until the truth began to surface, it worked for Joni. And once it happened, everything seemed different. The news rapidly went viral once it was first reported. It wasn't just some Christian rumors. It was impossible to overlook the dispute. This had a distinct effect. This was Daystar's spokesperson, Joni Lamb, whom countless people had prayed for, trusted, and shared their tears with. She had spent years sitting in front of a studio, advising people to be truthful, devoted, and unflinching. Now, however, it seemed to be the opposite. A lavish honeymoon that was funded by the ministry. A $100,000 gift that made no sense and was authorized behind closed doors. Amazing things were being heard. At first, there was stillness. A long, uncomfortable silence. There was no live explanation from Joni. No statement was issued by Daystar. No news conference, no apology, nothing. Donors, viewers, and supporters waited. However, the individuals who had contributed their funds, allegiance, and faith were confronted with a blank wall. Words would never be able to undo the harm caused by silence. The consideration of money was no longer the only consideration. It turned into a trust issue. It seems like a financial and spiritual betrayal when you open your heart and believe someone is a symbol of something precious and they remain silent when found out. This is the outcome of entrusting them with your prayers, tithes, and confidence. They made use of social media. YouTube videos began to appear. Former backers posted emotional responses. Some shared personal accounts of how Joni's advice had gotten them through difficult times and how they had been Daystar donors for years. They felt used after being accepted into her large spiritual family. These were actual people, loyal people, not online trolls or detractors seeking a scandal. A woman stated, "I thought I was giving to God's work. Now I don't even know what that money paid for," whilst another individual stated, "It's not about the $100,000. It's about the lies. It's about the fact that they didn't even think we deserved an explanation." The criticism quickly grew as Christian blogs and religious podcasts promoted the story, and former Daystar insiders alluded to other items like expensive dinners, private jets, and designer clothing. The problem was that the accounts were inaccessible to anybody outside the tight circle, and without financial transparency, it was impossible to confirm that the honeymoon was the only personal expense funded by donor funds. The fact that Daystar had been established in this manner from the start, without accountability, without required financial disclosures, and without annual reports, made many even more furious. Daystar's silence felt like a kick to the face. On her TV appearances, Joni kept hosting, preaching, and grinning as though nothing had happened, but behind the scenes, something had changed. The ministry's credibility suffered, donations slowed, viewership declined. Some churches that had previously supported Daystar ceased doing so, and others discreetly departed to avoid being linked to the problem. "We were wrong," they wanted someone to say, looking them in the eye, because they needed to know why. Instead, they encountered more quiet. Joni finally admitted that she had reimbursed the money, but she provided no explanation, no receipts, no timeline, and no apology, just a brief acknowledgement, and then business as usual resumed. Many, however, were not satisfied because they questioned whether the money would have ever been repaid had it not been revealed or if her own son hadn't raised the issue. They continued to hear that. This was not an isolated error, rather, it was a window into how the system operated. 3 people made decisions behind closed doors. Money from low-income families, elderly widows, and single moms might be spent carelessly, inquiries were ignored, and this system seemed to lack accountability. Jonathan Lamb proved to be the story's unsung hero. He had just done the right thing. He asked questions, expressed concerns, and told the truth when he realized that things weren't being handled properly. He had not come to the media with a fury or attacked his mother. As the backlash mounted, supporters divided into 2 factions, those who wanted to forgive Joni and stayed faithful to her, and those who completely abandoned her. Others couldn't see past the fact that she hadn't accepted responsibility, faced people who trusted her, and spoken the crucial words, "I'm sorry." For many, that act meant the world, but others tried to defend her by arguing that everyone makes mistakes. They only knew what had happened because of him, the sole voice in the room that would not be quiet. "I let you down." It was about more than money, and the ministry continued to anticipate the storm to pass. But it didn't because it was about broken faith, and broken faith is hard to heal, especially when it is met with denial and deflection. What was real? How did the performance go? Who was Joni Lamb, really? People could see and sense that something had changed behind her grin, and no amount of studio lighting could cover up that type of brokenness. The Daystar brand endured, and the shows continued to air. The conviction that this was a holy, reliable ministry had been upended, and something harder to categorize had taken its place. Because they felt burned by Joni and the entire system that permitted this to occur, a system that concealed itself behind legal definitions like church to avoid transparency, a system that permitted spiritual leaders to act like CEOs and face no repercussions. Many former donors declared they would never donate to a ministry again. By the time Joni Lamb acknowledged that she had returned the $100,000, the public had already moved past the money. They wanted the truth, not a refund, and someone to finally take the camera, look them in the eyes, and explain how something like this could have happened. Not perfection, but honesty, not justifications, is what makes the quiet so painful. Faith was the foundation of Joni Lamb's media empire, but it was destroyed after a single occurrence. The structure was still there, but the faith that supported it had never been the same. And since it didn't, the formerly untouchable ministry felt suddenly vulnerable. The questions simply became louder, and the trust became more brittle. People realized that Daystar had been keeping things a secret for far too long. It was about years of confinement, a system that prevented outsiders from entering, and a leadership group that was so close-knit that genuine accountability was never possible. When the lights were finally turned on, one serious voice in the room prompted longtime supporters to ask questions they never thought they would. Where did my money go? Who actually makes the choices? The issue is that, whether you donate $5 or $500 to a ministry, you are contributing a bit of your heart, your faith, and your trust because you think that ministry is accomplishing something more than yourself, something virtuous, something lasting. However, it feels like a personal betrayal when that gift is exploited, even once, and more individuals are left in silence when there is no apology, no confession, and no effort to set things right. The bridge's reconstruction leaves a scar. Others had never missed a broadcast, still others had called the prayer line in tears, still others had been comforted by Joni's voice, still others had felt like they were a part of something genuine, and yet others had been sending monthly donations for 10, 15, or even 20 years. Now, however, it seemed as though everything had been painstakingly assembled on a stage, painstakingly scripted and arranged, and now painfully broken. And now that additional information has emerged, Daystar's organizational structure is being scrutinized. There were no donor reports, third-party audits, or the necessary transparency, and the public had no idea what was happening with the books. When the public realized how easy it was for a ministry to manage millions of dollars without oversight, they started to ask more serious questions, not just about Daystar but about all ministries like it. This arrangement had protected them for years, and Joni had used, some say manipulated, it to operate with nearly total freedom. Why is there no accountability? Why can religious leaders create empires without any financial restraints? Why do we have faith in systems that keep our money hidden? What became of Joni Lamb? She opened a door, and people kept passing through it. Not because they were interested in Daystar, but because it was a part of a larger pattern, a loophole, a structure that allowed any religious leader to embezzle money without facing legal consequences simply by referring to their business as a church. Christian watchdog groups took notice, churchgoers organized discussions, and even the secular media took notice. Accountability was becoming more and more of a need. The people at the top needed to remember who they served, not themselves, their lifestyle, or their image, but the people, the givers, and the believers. They also wanted the truth, mechanisms to prevent this from happening again, donor protection, money tracking, and leadership held to the same standards they preached from the stage. Joni, on the other hand, kept going forward. She didn't resign, she didn't come clean, and she still appeared on behind the scenes, but nothing was the same. Some sources claim that the team was in disarray, that viewership and donations were low, and that morale had dropped. Even though Joni seemed to be acting normally, many could feel the weight beneath her smile. The innocence is gone.